Sanje Chedang Suiki Chonam La Chandro Bado Dani Chap Suichi Dagi Jinzo Jepe Sanam Je Rula Pinchi Sanje Rubhajo Sanje Chedang Suiki Chonam La Chandro Bado Dani Dagi Jinzo Jepe Sonam Je Rula Pinchi Sanje Rupashu Sanje Cheda Suichi Chonam La Chandro Bado Dani Chap Suchi Dagi Jinzo Jepe Sonam Rula Pinchi Sanje Rupashu Paden Save Lama Rinpoche Dagi Chiwo Peme Denshula Kadin Jimbo Gone Jezonde Kusong Tulche Dut Sando So firstly, good morning for this fifth day, I think it is, of our course, the Kibi course. 2026. So in this particular section, we're continuing with the study of Geshe Chekawa's 7 points of Lojong, or 7 points of mind training, which, as you know now, we're studying through the commentary composed by my master, Kamatin Rinpoche, called Dispelling the Darkness of Suffering. And following the root verses, Rinpoche divides the text itself, the main part of the text, into 7 chapters, 1 chapter per point, of course. And where we're up to is that we're currently studying the 3rd point, the 3rd chapter, which, following on from the explanation of the principal meditations of Lojong for relative and ultimate bodhicittas. In this 3rd point, this 3rd chapter, the concern is with how to integrate or transform difficult circumstances, negative, challenging circumstances with our Lojong practice. Not just how do we manage to cope with them, how do we manage not to be thrown off one, they stimulate one to develop stronger spiritual qualities, such as patience in regard to harm done to us. So anyway, we've done all that, we've looked at that. I mean, we've discussed it, I don't mean we've done it. So that would be a fine thing if we had. So we come now to the second method of turning negativity into the path, bringing it onto the path. And in this we rely upon the perspective of ultimate bodhicitta, applying what we were taught in the meditation for ultimate bodhicitta, applying it to the encounter with negative circumstances. Rinpoche says in the commentary, now ultimate bodhicitta, the method to cut through suffering within the state of emptiness. He means through relying upon the ultimate truth, which is, of course, the emptiness beyond elaboration of all phenomena. And this we meditated upon in the analytical and settling meditations of ultimate bodhicitta. First looking into appearances and how their basis is none other than mind itself, and then looking into the mind to see that it also lacks any characteristic of intrinsic nature. But at the same time, in the settling meditation, we come to relax in the actual fundamental primordial nature of mind, which is the Buddha nature, described here as the Alaya, the basis for both samsara and nirvana. So we'll be relying upon that perspective again here. Rinpoche says, the root text says, Geshe Chekawa says, view delusory appearances as the four kayas. Kaya means, of course, the bodies of the Buddha, the bodies of a Buddha. View delusory appearances as the four kayas. The protection of emptiness is unsurpassed. So there's two rather brief and enigmatic sentences, on the surface at least enigmatic. Now Rinpoche will unpack them for us. So with regard to the delusory appearances, Rinpoche says, whatever kind of physical or mental suffering arises for us, you should establish certainty, become confident, become convinced, in the dreamlike nature of all such internal and external phenomena. Remember, in the second point, view all appearances as dreams. Rather than clinging to external phenomena as having any reality, see whatever arises through the doors of your six senses as having no more intrinsic reality, no more solidity than appearances arising from karmic imprints in dreams. So it is with the encounter with sufferings and difficulties in everyday life. We should establish certainty that external phenomena, the objects we seem to encounter, and internal phenomena, our thoughts and emotions in response to these objects, are never experienced as real, except as appearances created by the power of deluded mind. Deluded mind signifies our mind is right now not able to see phenomena as they truly are, because it's like intoxicated by the power of karmic imprints. And those karmic imprints arise from day to day, moment to moment, life to life, and produce appearances which in our ignorance we grasp as solid and real, thinking that appearance is a real object external to my mind, and therefore react to it with fear or desire or aggression or whatever it is. But it has no such status, no such independent reality, no more than the nightmare images or the pleasant images during sleep time. So they're just delusory appearances. Delusory in the sense that I'm projecting onto them a reality they don't have, as if I believed in the images in my dreams, rather than simply realizing they're just karmically maturing imprints. So that is the first point to apply. Now, with regard to the teaching that appearances should be seen as the four kayas, firstly we've established that appearances are not other than mind. Now we can look into the mind itself to see that it is nothing other than the reality of the Buddha. We call this, in one way we can call this the Buddha nature, but here we talk about it in terms of the full realization of the Buddha nature at Buddhahood allows a Buddha to manifest four modes of being, four bodies. The Sanskrit word is kaya, the Tibetan word is ku. So those four bodies that one will manifest at the time of enlightenment are actually already present as the fundamental nature of our mind. Just like gold, if it's covered by base metals, base substances, the gold cannot be seen. But nevertheless, it's always naturally present. It never became contaminated by the base metal that surrounds it. Similarly, with the reality of our mind, it's covered now by the deposit of our disturbing emotions and ignorance, but it has never lost its fundamental purity. And when the base metal that surrounds it is removed, then the gold fully manifests its qualities. And that full manifestation of the qualities of the Buddha nature at Buddhahood is called the four kayas, the four bodies of a Buddha. So now the root verses, and in a way, the root line here and the commentary is a kind of introduction to this nature of mind. What we call in the Kagyu system, nutro. Nutro means like directly pointing to the essence, meaning the essence of mind. So often it's glossed in English as introducing the nature of mind or pointing out the nature of mind. Such a pointing out or such an introduction is not like relying upon reasoning, the kind of reasoning we see in the Madhyamaka treatises or so on. It's rather that through the very simple words, we're encouraged to look right into our experience at this present moment and see this fundamental reality of mind. And the more we can do that, the more confidence we will gain in being able to do this when challenging situations arise. So that instead of taking challenging situations as being derived from something real out there, some enemy, some difficult situation, or whatever, we see it's nothing more than the manifestation of mind. Nothing more than the play of mind. And the mind itself is not an ego, not a self. It is none other than the reality of the Buddha, the four kayas. So these appearances of enemy or friend or whatever it is are themselves the manifestation of the four kayas, the reality of the Buddha. So Rinpoche puts it in this way. By looking into mind, the agent of confusion, he calls agent of confusion because in one way, from a samsaric point of view, the mind is the source of all our delusions. So, but it seems to be the source of all our delusions, but in fact it's because the mind is clouded at the moment by ignorance. The ignorance never became part of the mind. It never destroyed or altered the nature of mind, but on the mind, the cloud of ignorance is at the moment operative. And so we can say the mind is the basis of confusion, the basis of these delusory appearances. But, Rinpoche says, by looking into mind, the following four kayas can be ascertained. One can see, one can realize the presence of the four kayas within our mind, even now, at this very moment. That is to say, that the empty essence of mind itself is the Dhammakaya, the truth body of a Buddha. The truth body of a Buddha, meaning when a Buddha recognizes the true nature of reality, which is why he or she is a Buddha, they recognize they have achieved the body called the Dhammakaya, the body of the true nature of phenomena. But the true nature of phenomena is emptiness, beyond all elaboration. It cannot be grasped in a word or a concept. It cannot be said to be existent, like a table or a body, but it cannot be said to be non-existent, as if it's merely the opposite of existence. All terms like existence and non-existence do not apply to the true nature of reality. And therefore do not apply to the Dhammakaya, the Buddha's wisdom that realizes this. So the Dhammakaya is empty of essence. Essence would mean something has a substance, a substantial existence which you can grasp and take hold of. But if we look into mind, we do not see such a characteristic. The mind has no beginning, doesn't come from anywhere, is not produced by anything. In this very moment, we cannot say it has a color, a shape, or it dwells anywhere. And we cannot even say the mind will cease at a certain point, because as it never began, as it never arose, as it doesn't endure now, it has no cessation. So the nowo, as you put into better, the essence of mind is none other than emptiness. That's our mind right now, empty of essence. And that, if we were to realize it fully, is the Dhammakaya of the Buddha. But at the same time, as mind is empty of essence, that emptiness is not like the emptiness of dead matter, like a mere blankness, a mere nothingness. Because at the same time that mind is essentially empty, it's intrinsically luminous. It is endowed with the character of light, of the clear light, beyond all duality. That luminosity of mind is not like a second half of mind besides the emptiness. It is inextricably united with the emptiness. Where there is emptiness of essence, there is the intrinsic luminosity. Where there's the intrinsic luminosity, there's the essential emptiness. And in terms of Buddha, in terms of Buddhahood, it is this luminosity which is the Sambhogakaya, the body of enjoyment. Through a Buddha enjoys the qualities of bliss, of realm, of disciples, and so on and so forth. So, which means that the Buddha is perceptible, at least by the bodhisattvas, who he is able to train in the Pure Lands. So, where is that Sambhogakaya? It's really present here now, in the luminous, intrinsic nature of mind. Now, thirdly, Rinpoche continues, the various appearances of samsara and nirvana that manifest from the empty and luminous mind are actually the nirmanakaya, meaning right now in our state, as ordinary sentient beings who've not recognized the Buddha nature, not recognized the essential emptiness and intrinsic luminosity of mind, due to that ignorance, the appearances of the dualistic appearances of samsara and nirvana, the opposite of samsara, of course, continually manifest. Worlds, beings, etc., and then all the disturbing emotions and karma, and so on and so forth. All those manifest endlessly out of the empty and luminous mind. But as that is the case, they also are nothing other than the Buddha mind. All those appearances, no matter how many there are, and they're limitless in number, are the playful emanation of the essential emptiness and intrinsic luminosity of mind. And we call that, in terms of the Buddha, the nirmanakaya. Because with this body, the nirmanakaya, the Buddhas can manifest in any form necessary to benefit sentient beings. Ordinary sentient beings such as ourselves. Whether it be in the form of a Buddha teaching the Dhamma, whether it be in the form of bodhisattva, like in the previous lives of the Buddha, so-called, or whether it be in the form of medicine, or art, or a musician, or an artist, or in fact, any kind of form that will connect people with the Dharma. These are the three types of Nirmanakaya, of course. So all those appearances, being nothing other than mind in their source, being therefore just the play of the Buddha nature mind itself, empty and luminous, what else can they be but the Nirmanakaya? We react to them now as if they're solid, impure objects, and therefore react to them with fear or desire or hatred or whatever. But if we could see them for what they are, we would just see the play of the Buddha nature, the Nirmanakaya. And then, the fact, Rinpoche continues, the non-differentiation of these three within naturally existent primordial space constitutes the fourth body, the Svabhavikakaya. The Svabhavikakaya means the integral body, or the body of identity, meaning that all these three kayas of a Buddha are not separate entities, as it were, lined up side by side. There's a unity to them, because they're all just the manifestation of the fundamental Buddha nature. Similarly, when we encounter appearances, it's not just that they're the Nirmanakaya, as we've just been told, they are all the kayas. Because in the Nirmanakaya, the emptiness is there. In the Nirmanakaya, the appearance of the Nirmanakaya, there is luminosity. So at any encounter with any appearance whatsoever, whether beautiful or ugly, whether fearful or delightful, whether external or internal, all four kayas are being disclosed. All four kayas are being revealed to us. All four kayas are present. If we can look into appearances in this way, we will see nothing other than the four kayas of the Buddha. That is the point. That is what we're being introduced to here. To look into appearances and see it as the disclosure of the four kayas. And therefore, Rinpoche says, following Geshe Chekawa's line, to settle without distraction in this recognition of all appearances as the four kayas, within the sphere of this view, that appearances are the four kayas, is the protection of the profound, unelaborated emptiness. He doesn't mean emptiness needs protection. He means this is the way emptiness, by realizing the true nature of reality, to be emptiness, or here described as the four kayas, we're protected from from any, so to speak, negative outcome, no matter what the appearances are. We cannot be overcome by them, we cannot lose the path, because we settle in the confidence of this view that all appearances are empty, or in short, all appearances are none other than the four kayas. As Rinpoche continues, this is the unsurpassed, like the supreme method. There's no greater method by which to liberate the illusory appearances of suffering into the expanse of the four Buddha kayas. So like, due to our ignorance, we grasp at these things as real and external, and consequently manufacture more suffering. But we have a choice. If we can look into all appearances in this way and see none other than the four kayas, then all experience becomes the path. As Rinpoche says, it is important to practice this every day. So it's like, here is the bridge from the ultimate bodhicitta meditation into everyday life experience. The more in the main practice we settle in the empty and luminous manifest nature of mind, then the easier this will be to apply this perspective in everyday life. So that is the ultimate perspective. which again one might say is like showing, a link between the ultimate bodhicitta teaching and the Mahamudra perspective that we treasure so much in the Kagyu tradition. Now the third main teaching in this third point, how to transform adverse conditions, was teaching called the 4 practices, or 4 skillful methods. These are kind of like supplementary methods which will help us to have the confidence and the strength to transform negativity into the path itself. And mainly these four skillful practices are in a way drawn from the Dharma teachings themselves and just brought into our Lojong practice to reinforce it. So you will most likely have heard of at least some of these teachings and practices already outside of Lojong. But here they're brought in to aid, to help Lojong. It's like extra resources for the path, we could say. So in the root text, Geshe Chekawa introduces them in this way. The 4 practices are the supreme method meaning techniques, supreme skillful means or skillful techniques, which, as I'm saying, reinforce the Lojong. So what are these 4 skillful techniques? Rinpoche says, the practices here are 1, gathering the accumulations of merit and transcendental wisdom, of course. 2, confessing negative deeds. 3, offering torma to gods and demons. And 4, offering torma to the Dharma protectors. These 4 are the supreme methods by which to swiftly pacify all hostile conditions on the path to enlightenment and to obtain experiential realization. We could say that they're like, although they're not in themselves the core of the Lojong, which is meditating on the conventional ultimate bodhicitta, they're very useful resources to draw on. Yes, that's probably the way to look at them. And so the Lojong practitioner will utilize them to the extent he or she finds useful. You see, for instance, because I'm skipping ahead here, but in one way, one could say that the Lojong practitioner does not need, for instance, to make offerings to the Dharma protectors to overcome obstacles. In fact, Rinpoche has pointed this out, because he or she should, in a way, just rely entirely upon the ultimate and conventional bodhicitta. But most of us will need such help to kind of back up our stability in the Lojong. So one shouldn't disregard them. They're very, very useful. The first one is actually essential anyway. So the first one is gathering the accumulations. And as I mentioned, the accumulations means in Mahayana, the Bodhisattva who has generated bodhicitta and therefore entered the Bodhisattva path, is said that he or she travels to enlightenment by, on the one hand, practicing skillful behavior, such as giving, moral discipline, and so on, through which he or she builds up the stock, the accumulation, the provision of merit. And on the other hand, the Bodhisattva, through meditation and wisdom, gathers the accumulation, the stock, the provision of transcendental wisdom. And finally, these two, transcendental wisdom on one side and merit produced by skillful behavior on the other, culminate in the level of Buddhahood. So, as Atisha has explained to us in the Lamp of the Path of Enlightenment, the Bodhisattva requires these two wings of merit and wisdom, and he gathers them in this way. So here they will be taught as a resource for our Lojong practice. First, Rinpoche quotes Tilopa, the great Siddha Tilopa, explaining why we mustn't disregard them, why they're essential. Tilopa said, he's addressing his great disciple Naropa, "Naropa, my son, until you realize these dependently arising appearances in truth were never born, until you realize emptiness fully, you should never never be separate from the wheels of your chariot." The wheels of your chariot, what carries you to enlightenment, the two accumulations. So the two accumulations are the two wheels to make the chariot a suitable vehicle to carry you to enlightenment. So that's Tilopa's injunction. So now Rinpoche will describe the accumulations. Firstly, merit, and then wisdom. And so he says, in order to perfect the conceptual accumulation of merit, conceptual meaning that these are techniques which rely upon a relative truth framework, such as the practitioner, need to do these techniques, they'll produce such and such a temporary beneficial result, and so on. So in order to perfect the conceptual accumulation of merit, protect the vows and pledges of the three vehicles as much as you can. Three vehicles, here referring to Hinayana, or sometimes out of politeness we call this the Shravaka vehicle, the disciple vehicle. The then second vehicle, the common Mahayana, the Bodhisattvayana, and then third vehicle, the Vajrayana, which in one way, of course, is just a special application of Mahayana since it shares the same bodhicitta inspiration. But three vehicles, as we commonly say, and each of them we need to protect. Rinpoche is saying we need to build up merit, to build up spiritual force, spiritual strength. We need to protect the vows and pledges that we take in the course of entering and following through in the practice of the three vehicles. In regard to these excellent precepts, Rinpoche says, it is said that, and we'll come back to the vows and pledges, so we're not missing that out. In regard to these excellent precepts, it is said that a good Dhamma practitioner does not stray from faith and devotion towards even the least part of the training, revering each in the manner of a wish-fulfilling gem raised aloft. Rinpoche's point being that it would be quite easy for us to try to isolate what we think are the most important points of the array of teachings and practices of the three vehicles, and say, well, I don't need this bit, I don't need that, and I don't need the other. But most likely, the bits we say we don't need, they're the ones we most need. And especially because we have a tendency to overrate ourselves, and therefore our attitude to Dharma is often, just give me the exciting bits, like the Mahamudra that His Holiness was teasing us with yesterday. We're all ready for Mahamudra, but who's ready to fill their offering bowls in the morning? But it's said that the person who realizes emptiness is able to realize it precisely because they've looked after every aspect of the practice, including filling their offering bowls in the morning. So every part of the Dharma is useful. It doesn't mean we have to practice every single teaching in a day, but we shouldn't neglect any part, thinking it's beneath us or we're superior to it. That's a way to make the Dharma useless for us. So Rinpoche wants to give us a few tips then on this. Accordingly, so, here's some ideas, here's some suggestions Rinpoche is gently putting out there for us, which we could take up, if we like, for accumulating merit. Accordingly, make new representations of the enlightened body, speech, and mind of the Buddha, statues. And of course, if you're not particularly gifted in statue making, you could sponsor some. You could do that. Speech means Dharma texts. Help Dharma texts to be printed, to be published. And mind, of course, are the stupas. To help to support the construction of stupas. And when you have these things yourself at home, representations of the bodhicitta, keep them clean, put them in a good place, venerate them, in fact, by your prostrations before your shrine, etc. And Rinpoche says, and repair old ones. If they're damaged, try to repair them. Using these as a support, make prostrations and offerings, and pay reverence also to one's lamas and the 3 jewels, by such things as reciting the 7-branch prayer. For instance, we could use the 7-branch prayer that's in Shantideva's Bodhitavatara, or we could use the 7-branch prayer that's in the King of Aspirations prayer, or Gelongma Palmo's version of the 7-branch prayer that's in the Chenrezig puja. There's so many ways we could do this. So these kind of seemingly devotional practices, to use that adjective, are extremely powerful in making merit. And at the same time, you see, they soften us. They soften our mind and make it easier for us later to come to understand emptiness. Because by being willing, so to speak, to get down on our knees and pay reverence to these symbols of the 3 jewels, these symbols of the enlightenment that we're trying to dedicate ourselves to, we become more open to their influence and therefore approach them. So we come closer to our goal by these very simple devotional practices. And this is the meaning of making merit. And then there's other ways to make merit outside the formal religious ways. Rinpoche says, provide for the poor and the destitute, dispense medicine to the sick, build hospitals, and so on. So there's all, of course, practices of the perfection of giving. In short, gather the accumulations to the best of your ability and make dedications and vast aspiration prayers. Whenever we do a meritorious act, we multiply the merit by dedicating that merit, like taking a drop of water, which left to itself would quickly dry up, and instead placing it in an ocean where it will never dry up. The consequence of a solitary virtuous act, undedicated, is just like the single drop of water. It will ripen in a tiny positive result, but nothing very vast. But if we dedicate the merit of our actions, even small ones, they become vast in consequence. So, now to return to the vows, as I promised, or threatened, I'm not sure what I'm doing there. All followers of Tibetan Buddhism, Rinpoche says, odd to see, anyway, the Dharma, that's in the Tibetan form. All followers of Tibetan Buddhism take the vows of individual liberation according to the individual circumstances. So he's going to talk about the vows that belong to the 3 vehicles. Each of the 3 vehicles has its code of discipline that we adopt. And the point of adopting a vow is to act as an underlying support for the practice we do within that vehicle. Because a vow binds us. A vow made from our heart commits us. It makes the actions that we do subsequent to that vow much more powerful, because there is this underlying force of intention. Of course, when we go against that vow, it's much more serious than a simple negative deed, because we've contradicted this commitment we made. So the result of that is more negative. But the positive result of acting in accord with vows is incredibly strong. And so vows were skillful means that the Buddha taught us to support our practice. That's how we should understand. which of course is why we should always choose, know that we can choose voluntarily to take a vow. But once a vow is taken, it has a kind of force within our mind stream. And so it's very significant and very powerful, very helpful to take vows, but we're free to take them. But if we want to follow the three vehicles, then it's essential. So the vow that, properly speaking, belongs to the Hinayana, the Shravaka vehicle, the first vehicle, is called in Sanskrit pratimoksha. Here it's translated as individual liberation, the Tibetan sosotalpa, meaning the Hinayana practitioner, his or her aim is to eliminate the causes of suffering in their own mind stream, and therefore achieve the cessation of suffering, what they understand as nirvana. But they do not go beyond that. They have no, as it were, further higher aspiration than that. So the vow of the pratimoksha, well, there's seven types of, plus a one-day temporary one, but we can reduce them just from simplicity to the pratimoksha for monks and nuns, the renunciates on one side, or the pratimoksha for lay people like ourselves. When do you take that? Well, essentially when you've taken refuge. Whoever's taken refuge in the three jewels, and therefore made the first step on the Buddhist path, is eligible then to make the pratimoksha vow. And for lay people, there are 5 trainings which we can take, beginning with the first one, not to take life, and so on and so forth. But often one might begin just with one, and then add a second, and then a third, or one can take all 5. But generally Tibetans consider taking all 5 to be not a monastic discipline, but for many, the beginning, which will be followed by proper monastic discipline from the other pratimoksha vows for nuns or monks and so on. So the essence of the pratimoksha vow for us as lay people is to abandon harming others. That's to sum it up as essentially. Then Rinpoche says, so all Tibetan, you see he's reflecting the Tibetan situation, but extending it to us, if we're serious about Buddhism, we'll be studying with lamas, then this will apply to us too. Beyond that, all will have taken the bodhisattva vow, meaning they've entered into the Mahayana by formally committing themselves to achieve Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. Which vow goes beyond this life? The pratimoksha vow is at the longest taken to the end of this life because it is based upon our body. It's an abstention from certain types of physical behavior. But the bodhisattva vow is a mental vow, which therefore we take with the understanding, I take the bodhisattva vow, I will follow the path throughout all lives until Buddhahood itself. And thirdly, for the Vajrayana, they will have, in order to enter into Vajrayana, they'll have taken at least one major empowerment and some permission initiations of secret mantra. Secret mantra is here an alternate term for Vajrayana. And so this kind of way picks up on what His Holiness was talking about. You see, there's the proper situation and the actual situation. If I can talk a little bit informally. The proper situation is like this. The proper situation is to act in accord with what Vajradhara Buddha taught in the Tantras. And what Vajradhara Buddha taught in the Tantras, first in Akanishta, and then it was repeated in this world, is that the only way to enter Vajrayana is to receive Abhisheka. Abhisheka or Wongko in Tibetan. And the core of an Abhisheka is that your 5 aggregates, your 5 skandhas, are ripened to become the 5 Buddhas. Because actually, in a way, they are potentially the 5 Buddhas, but that process must be, as it were, must commence properly with a ripening, a maturing initiation. It's like the potential within the 5 skandhas is activated by an abhisheka. Or to put it another way, your 5 skandhas are aligned with the 5 Buddhas. Your 5 disturbing emotions are aligned with the 5 transcendental wisdoms as well. So a true abhisheka has this function to ripen you. Now, in each of the 4 classes of tantras, Kriya, Charya, Yoga, and Anuttara Yoga Tantra, there are different types of abhisheka, which is translating as major empowerment. The highest level of Tantra, Anuttara Yoga Tantra, has within itself each initiation has 4 major parts to it. The so-called vows initiation, which itself has 11 sections. Then the secret initiation, the wisdom, and the word, or 4th initiations. Each of which authorize you to a certain type of practice from the development and then later on the completion stages. So the lower tantras don't have all those 4. In the major abhishekas don't have all these 4 types of initiation. In fact, it's only in the Yoga Tantra that even the Vasa initiation is present before the Anuttara Yoga Tantra. The Kriya Tantra and Charya have shorter forms of major initiation. But nevertheless, Abhisheka is what ripens you. Now, after you've received an Abhisheka and are ripened in this way to embark upon the Vajrayana practice, then for specific deity meditations, you can receive what's called the subsequent permission. In Tibetan, Jesanangwa. Je meaning subsequent to the major abhisheka, Nang meaning permitting. So a typical Jainang, as it's called, typical Jainang or permission initiation, and it's similar for all 4 classes of tantras, it authorizes you, the Lama authorizes you to meditate on visualizing the deity's body, reciting the deity's mantra, and meditating on the wisdom of the deity's mind. In short, you can do a sadhana in which you cultivate your identity with the body, speech, and mind of the deity. But formally and properly speaking, that subsequent permission will only really work as an effective permission to practice if you've already been ripened. Right. You get your vow, your Vajrayana vow, in an abhisheka. Even permission initiations always have refuge and bodhisattva vow in them, but the specific Vajrayana vows come in a major abhisheka. And the most important form of the Vajrayana vow, the commitment to avoid what are called the 14 root downfalls, is only given, you take it, or put it the way around, in a yoga or anuttara major empowerment, such as chakra samvara, or hevajra, or guya samaja, kala chakra, etc., etc. Just one addition to this, the Guru Yoga initiations, such as, for instance, Jetsun Milarepa Guru Yoga initiation, although it's not as elaborate as a major mandala initiation of Anuttara, because it does have in it the 4 initiations, Vars, secret, wisdom, and word, it also bestows upon you the Vajrayana, the highest Vajrayana commitments. And therefore it is a Wong, an initiation, and not a Jainang. So that's the correct situation as Vajradhara established. But as His Holiness mentioned, and as everybody who knows about these things knows, already in Tibet there's some lamas to benefit large crowds of people who were attracted to teachings and so on. Jainangs, permission initiations, were given without establishing whether everybody present had received before that a qualifying major initiation. So it became quite widespread, even in Tibet, that these permission initiations would be given. And in Tibet, many collections of permission initiations were gathered. The ninth Karmapa collected together many in his famous collection called the Chikshikundral. And in Sakya, Bari Lotsawa collected the 100 initiations that he'd received in India in the so-called Bari Jatsa. And in Kadam, there was the Natang Jatsa and so on. So in fact, in the Druptak Kundu, there's nearly 600 such permission initiations. So it became and when Lamas came to the West, again, it was difficult to establish. There was not the time usually to give such major qualifying initiations, the major abhishekas. Neither was it always possible to know who'd taken what. So it again became customary for permission initiations to be given, and many of the people there would not, in a way, be formally qualified, but they nevertheless received these permission initiations. And of course, it's also assured us yesterday that at least there's some blessing from that, even if it's not formally enough. All this I'm mentioning so that you're clear about when you would get a vow. In a permission initiation, you do not get Vajrayana vows. You take refuge once more, and therefore the individual liberation vow is kind of at least essentially present. The bodhisattva vow is present. Sometimes there's a commitment that you can make to repeat a certain number of mantras, but that can be called a samaya, a pledge if you like, but it's not the full Vajrayana vow. So that should introduce some light, although maybe it will only produce more darkness of confusion, I don't know. So, in other words, everybody's got vows from all three vehicles, or should have vows from all three vehicles. And Rinpoche says, this is the general situation. And here comes the kicker, so to speak, which means that it's not only left to the monastic sangha to practice the guarding of conduct. We all have to. If we've received these vows of the three vehicles, even as lay people, we have a code of conduct that's embodied in these vows to live up to. The entire lay sangha and ordained sangha practices acceptance of virtue and rejection of non-virtue, endeavors in skillful means to perfect the great accumulations, and makes aspiration prayers for the name and meaning of I am a Dharma practitioner to become a reality, and Dharma country. This place is a Dharma country. We make an aspiration for that to be the case. So what Rinpoche is saying is, if one was a lay person and thought, I don't have so much to do as a monk or nun, therefore I'm kind of deficient in my means of gathering merit, Rinpoche is saying it's simply not, Rinpoche is a monk by the way, it's simply not true. We've all got enough commitments and codes to live up to, whether we're monk or lay. So that is, as he calls it, the conceptual accumulation of merit. Then, Rinpoche continues, regarding the non-conceptual accumulation of primordial wisdom, because that was all about behavior, now it's about view. The non-conceptual accumulation of primordial wisdom, whether we practice just the methods of Lojong, so exchange yourself and others, meditate on emptiness, or we practice the Vajrayana meditations, such as the development and completion stages of Anuttara Yoga Tantra, whichever we do, it's necessary to engage in it with energy and diligence. So, for instance, with regard to your practice, whether it's Lojong or deity yoga, generate the altruistic mind in the preliminary stage, generate bodhicitta as your motivation. I'm going to do this practice in order to achieve Buddhahood for the benefit of all. Seal any virtue gathered in the main part, the actual core of the practice, by the non-objectification of the three circles. For instance, if one's meditating Chenrezig, Vajrayana sadhana, instead of thinking, right now I'm visualizing Chenrezig is here above my head, or he's here as my body, and I'm the meditator on that Chenrezig, and here's the technique I'm using. Let go of those three objectifications. Because if you don't, actually you'll never experience Chenrezig. You would never experience the reality of what the name Chenrezig points to, which is the Buddha nature beyond all elaboration, which cannot be generated by a technique. So you seem to be doing a technique, sitting down, doing the practice, visualizing, etc., reciting mantras, but it's just play. That's all it is. It's actually empty. Chenrezig is already present. You don't need to make him appear. And Chenrezig is not separate from you. He never has been. And no technique will make him appear. So that is the way Rinpoche is saying to make the main part of the practice really work by, giving it working. And conclude your practice by dedicating the merit. These three holy things, the Dhampasam that I talked about on the first day, beginning, middle, and end, by these three holy things, any merit from the practice is added to the sum of the two accumulations. So in this way, you're gathering the transcendental wisdom accumulation. In particular, to kind of re-emphasize this point, Rinpoche says, in particular, settle within the state without grasping, the state of the natural, luminous, empty ground of mind itself. This is the way to perfect the great accumulation of ultimate bodhicitta, the seed of the fruit of the Dhammakaya. So that's the first of the four skillful practices that are a resource for our practice, the gathering the accumulations. Now the second resource is the confession of sins, or misdeeds. Confession of sins or misdeeds, non-virtuous actions, whichever these euphemisms you like. Why is it necessary to do this? To have a method of practicing confession? Because left unpurified, the legacy of our negative actions from previous lives and this life, including, of course, breaking vows and pledges and so on, will weigh us down so much that we'll feel unable to accomplish our practice. It's like we are too heavy, too impure. It's not true, of course, but we will feel that. It's not true because our mind is naturally pure at all times. But nevertheless, we will be so strongly affected by this legacy, this weight of our negativity, that we will not have the, as it were, the sense of strength to be able to do much with our practice. So purification is absolutely necessary. And Buddha taught that the most effective means of purification is confession. Confession utilizing the so-called four powers. Rinpoche puts it like this. Due to the power of confused ignorance that grasps at a self from time beginning, we have accumulated a great number of non-virtuous actions. It's very helpful that Rinpoche puts it like this because, of course, it's increasingly less the case when one talks among Westerners that one has to acknowledge that people bringing the views of a background in Christianity to the matter. I have no idea what background people are bringing nowadays. Many people don't even know. Many people know less about Christianity than Rinpoche himself. That's not saying much. But anyway, nevertheless, it's good to point this out. What am I pointing out? Well, what Rinpoche is pointing out here. What does sin mean in Buddhism? Sin originates from ignorance, not original evil within us, or from some external source of original evil, But sin is the mistaken behavior that comes from grasping at a fiction, the fiction of self. The confused ignorance that grasping at self, which I've been doing. How long have I been doing? Since beginning this time, in fact, because that's why I'm doing it now, because I did it before. Through this, we've accumulated a great number of non-virtuous actions based upon the desire, which originates from my self-clinging, the hatred that originates from my self-clinging, and all the other disturbing emotions. So I've picked up quite a story since the beginning of this time, and a lot of it is very negative. I've got just a mass of bad habits, and they will get in the way of my practice, even my beautiful aspiration of bodhicitta. They'll strangle it if I can't let go of them, of this legacy. So, in other words, that's the way to understand what we're doing when we're confessing. Sin does not come from disobedience to a god or his rules or her rules, because there isn't such an entity, there are no such rules. But we can create suffering through our selfish behavior, and we have to let go of that and purify it. That's the importance of this thing, of this. So it's an entirely different philosophical basis than, say, in Christianity here. But still, confession is to be practiced. So as Rinpoche says, on the basis of our body, there are 10 non-virtues performed through the 3 gates of body, speech, and mind. I think everybody knows what the 10 non-virtues are, so I don't need to repeat them. And in particular, in addition to the 10 kind of fundamental non-virtuous actions, killing, sexual misconduct, stealing, lying, etc., covetous, etc., there are one might call the Buddhist sins. Even Rinpoche doesn't say that, but I'll put that in. The sins that only Buddhists can do, like breaking the Vinaya, the monastic discipline from the individual liberation vow, or inwardly breaking the bodhisattva vow, this resolve in your heart. By abandoning any sentient being, you abandon the bodhisattva vow. And then secretly, you can break your Vajrayana vows. So these are the Buddhist sins, if you like. Of course, unfortunately, we Buddhists are also committing the 10 ordinary ones too. So we're in a worse position, one might say. More opportunity to do negativity. So Rinpoche says, whether or not we're aware of breaking these vows, through the power of great laziness, of unconcern, and that means not taking our commitment seriously, through the many and forceful defilements, disturbing emotions, and our forgetfulness of our commitments, all this caused faults and downfalls. Downfalls means breaking of vows, to pour down like a great rain upon Dharma bears. Such a Dharma bear is a term meaning like Dharma hypocrite. We're Dharma hypocrites. We pretend to be virtuous, we pretend to live up to the vows, but due to unconcerned laziness, etc., we don't. We're just hypocrites. For this reason, because what do you give to a Dharma hypocrite? Well, you give him the four means of confession to purify that, so they can really practice the Dharma truly. For this reason, Rinpoche says, there are the 4 powers of confession. And what are the 4 powers of confession? I hear you call out in one voice. I don't, but I imagine I do. They are the power of support, and in this case this means to rely upon the refuge objects. Why do we need support? Because when we've been, like we have, been screwing up for so long, it's difficult to, as it were, find any strength in ourselves upon which we can pull ourselves up off the ground. We've fallen down so much through our self-indulgence, our sloppiness, etc. We need something to help us to get up. And that for us is provided by the 3 jewels. That's why we take refuge in the first place. So the first part of confession, and by the way, Shantideva explained all this in chapter 2 of the Bodhicitta. And so you, if you've been here then, when someone has taught it, you'll know all this. So the 3 jewels are the fundamental power of support, or reliance, sometimes we translate it as. The second is the power of regret. In other words, you need to sincerely, for confession of negativities, whether all of them or specific ones one can think of, you need to regret having done it. If you don't regret it, how could that negative imprint be, as it were, removed from your mind? It couldn't be. It couldn't be, because there's no sincerity, there's no wish for purification in your mind, which means you have to know why a negative action is to be confessed, which, as Shantideva explained to us in Bodhicitta, is by considering what negative behavior brings about in terms of consequences. Not just the suffering we inflict on others through it, but the suffering we'll experience in the future. So we need to have regret for confession to be effective. It's not a mechanical thing. There must be this sincerity in our heart. Thirdly, there's the power of antidote. Rinpoche glosses here as virtuous actions, meaning when you've been weak for a long time, it's like your muscles atrophy. Then you will find it hard to walk after being in bed for 6 months unmoving. You need to build up your muscle power again. Well, we are practicing confession in order to have the strength to do this sublimely wonderful, virtuous thing of practicing the bodhisattva path. So we need to build up our spiritual muscle power. And the way to do that is by practicing virtuous actions. Even small ones will help. During a few prostrations, for instance, help as a kind of antidote to negativity. And fourthly, the power of resolution, which is the commitment not to repeat this negative action. If you thought that you could confess, and then your slate would be clean, but you left open to yourself the opportunity to do more negative actions should the situation arise. Okay, I'm not going to do this for today, but I can't say for tomorrow. If something nice arrives, I might want it. Then there's no turning away from negativity in our life. We've not confessed properly. So there must be this fourth power also, the power of turning away, or the power of resolution, that I will desist from this behavior. So effective confession must embody these. Are there any rituals you can use that will, as it were, bring together all these 4 powers of confession? Yes, there are. As Rinpoche says, by the repeated application of the purifying agent of confession, relying on these 4 powers, together with such prayers as, for instance, the Bodhisattva confession of faults, of downfalls, which is often called the 35 Buddhas confession prayer, which Shaman Rinpoche, for instance, very much stressed in the Bodhipath centers, to call to mind the 35 Buddhas, Shakyamuni and the other Buddhas, and in front of them symbolically make prostrations, and then call upon them as witnesses of your confession, and vow not to repeat these acts and so on, and dedicate the merit. That's a very beautiful way of practicing confession, uniting the 4 powers. Or for Vajrayana, Rinpoche says, to recite the 100 mantra, to recite the repetition of the 100-syllable mantra of Vajrasattva, the second part of the Mahamudra Nundra, of course. Through these, whether the non-tantric practice of the 35 Buddhas or the tantric practice of the Vajrasattva, obscurations will swiftly clear. This is called the perfections of the great accumulation. And by the way, it's sometimes said that if there is one thing that one could say is positive about having committed sins is that it gives you the opportunity to purify. So it's like, always look on the bright side. We would not be doing Vajrasattva if we didn't bring this legacy of negativity with us. But through Vajrasattva we can utterly dissolve it. So that's the second means, the confession of sins, which a Lojong practitioner will use. Now the third one, giving tormas to gods and demons. Fortunately for us, His Holiness already talked a little bit about tormas. For instance, pointing out the Tibetan term torma means something that's cast off. And going back to ancient India, going back to the time of Lord Buddha himself, it's taught that one time he was approached by the demoness Harati, who had many demon children, and she was finding it difficult to feed the children. 70 is a lot, you know. So Buddha, having been approached by her, he told his monastic disciples to give some leftover food to Harati. I mean, one might say this is symbolic. After all, ghosts have only hallucinatory bodies. But nevertheless, a very great expression of generosity, which Lord Buddha instituted for his followers to do. So throughout the Dharma history, there is this practice of giving leftovers, giving torma to spirits, whether demonic ones or more benign ones, to give them torma. Now, Rinpoche wants us to get the right perspective on this. So in a way, he begins from a kind of ultimate standpoint, which is there are no gods and demons. He quotes Jessa Milarepa. Jessa Milarepa says, as long as mind is ignorant of the kunji, the basis, the primordial nature of mind, the Buddha nature, as long as you're ignorant of that, the demons of concepts are never exhausted. Meaning, somebody who's arrived at Buddhahood does not even see demons. Because in a way, demons depend upon concepts. They depend upon our disturbing emotions. So he says, so Rinpoche says, similarly, all the appearances of gods and demons, which we might imagine the gods are helping us or the demons are harming us, are merely reflections of the ignorance of our self-grasping, where we're deceived about the reality of the emptiness of mind. So we'll continue to live in a world of gods and demons unless we realize the true nature of reality. As Rinpoche says, nonetheless, until the collapsing of dualistic thought, at the time of Buddhahood, of course, it is certain that gods and demons will continue to appear to aid and obstruct us. Our concepts, our disturbed emotions will attract invisible beings from other realms to interact with us for harm or for good. So what to do? Acknowledging that the samsara is full of all kinds of beings, some visible, some not visible, and that we can come into contact with them. Well, we should act with generosity to them. They're sentient beings, they're samsaric, they also need to be liberated from suffering. So Rinpoche says, do not act with aggression towards them, but instead you can practice generosity to them by making smoke offerings, sur in Tibetan, giving them tormas, or the burnt food offering, where you burn some food, because it's said that ghosts, for instance, can live off odors. So, of course, if one doesn't know those techniques, the essential point is be generous. Have a generous mind which wishes for them to be well, to be healed of their difficulties, and so on and so forth. So that is, in other words, it's a practice entirely in harmony with exchanging self for others. Rather than taking enemies, demons and spirits as enemies to be conquered, treat them with love and generosity. If you know how, you can express this in these rituals, but if you don't know the rituals, you can still cultivate this generosity. And in fact, if you don't have any objects like tormas and so on that you can use, you've got something. Jasamurapa says, whoever can offer their own skandhas, their own aggregates as food, knows the path of self-taming, self-clinging. So in other words, in the Vajrayana, there is the method of using your own body, the first skandha, of course, as a kind of food, of transforming it through visualization into a kind of food which then can be transformed into any type of nutrition or nutritional substance that different types of beings would appreciate. He says, to offer the skandhas as food means to transform one's body into any meal that would be desired by different types of being, and to give it away as the offering of the body. Lujin in Tibetan. So for instance, there's a practice called kusulucha. Kusulucha means the offering made by a kusulu. A kusulu is a very simple, virtuous practitioner who doesn't have many possessions, does not do elaborate rituals, but instead can offer his or her own body, transformed through visualization, into the appropriate type of food for any being from the different classes, the different realms. Of course, in a more elaborate form, that takes the form of the duchichuyo, the cutting or severance practice, elaborated in Tibet by the great yogini Machi Labdrön. And in general, Rinpoche says, this offering the body also indicates the practice of compassion through sending and taking. So sending and taking is a way of giving the body. This point, by the way, shows where there is a bridge between Lojong and Machi Labdrön's practice of Chö, which is usually regarded as a different stream. It's one of the major practice lineages, separate from the Kadam Lojong, but there's a bridge between the two. Rinpoche says, in summary, make efforts to gladden and placate gods and demons. In particular, with regard to the negative ones, the deities of the dark directions, mean those who have malign, who have bad intentions, such as Maras, Geks, obstructing spirits, and so on. They were reborn in these forms due to their previous bad actions, and are thus a kind of compelled by the right meaning of karma in accord with the cause, to harm others. It's like they built up a habit which they're almost powerless to resist. So instead of complaining about them creating harm or obstructing your practice or something, you should feel genuine compassion for them, because it's like their minds are not their own to control. So they're just bound to harm you. You know, it's like they can't help themselves. One should think. Therefore, don't be aggressive or angry with them. As Rinpoche says, therefore dedicate merit to them and pray for their negative deeds and obscurations to be completely pacified, and that they attain supreme enlightenment. So that is the meaning of giving torma to gods and demons, the third of the supreme methods. Now, the next section is offering torma to the Dharma protectors, different class of entities, in fact, but it's a little bit long, and some very important points Rinpoche makes, which go beyond the Lojong, in fact. So I think we better pause here and practice offering food to our 5 skandhas upstairs. Just so we're strong enough for more teaching, not out of greed. So let's dedicate the merit from this teaching, and then we'll all be together happily with His Holiness this afternoon. Sunnam di tamshi sikpai tobe ne pe dranam pamche ne chiga nachi bala trupaye sipe sole drowa shu.